you know, supply lines are the just-in-time thing is very fragile, and what we really need is a sort of a network of lots of smaller producers that are able to sell into the locality. And obviously there's going to be surplus that needs to go into cities, etc. But we need to have something that is more almost like a honeycomb, if you like, of different operations. And I think with the technology we have today in terms of communication, that's more than possible. But it also is about re-empowering farmers. And farmers, if you think about it on the sort of, you know, the global multinational model, which is a sort of a out-and-out capitalist model, in my lifetime in farming is constantly disempowered farmers, and it squeezed them tighter and tighter and tighter until farmers are expected to do a huge amount for very little or at a loss. And that's a totally unsustainable system. I mean, financial sustainability and stability and sort of long-term thinking in agriculture is the most important thing as a sort of starting point for a secure food nation, which is how we need to think of things. And certainly in terms of self-sufficiency and all the other things that people are talking about frequently, but actually we're not doing yet, need to get right to the top of the agenda if we are to survive as a species.
There's never been a better time to shift our farming systems to be more regenerative and sustainable. David Wilson has been farming in this way for nearly 40 years, spending most of that time as the farm manager for now King Charles on his home farm at Highgrove.
When I first went to Highgrove, I was asked if I would be interested in trying some biologically sustainable farming, which is something I knew very little about, but it was a great opportunity to sort of start trying to grow food without using the high level of inputs that I'd been trained to do at agricultural college, because that was considered the norm. I guess, you know, 35, 40 years down the line, we now realise that actually business as usual is not an option, and that we have to change what we're doing, and that all our activities have to be as sustainable as possible.
David now farms 1,750 acres in the Cotswolds, which includes Fir Farm, a 750-acre mixed farming enterprise.
The Red Pole is a dual purpose, an old breed, so its production levels are pretty low. But because it is genetically not so highly tuned, it means that you can get that milk without having to spend a lot of money on concentrates. So this herd gets no concentrates, gets no grain-based food at all. It just gets silage, a bit of hay, and then grazing. And so it means your cost of production per litre is very low. And I think that's one of the key things that I wanted to really work with in a slightly experimental way with these cows, and they can certainly do it. 4,000 litres, even 3,500 litres, and you can retail that at, we sell ours for $1.20 a litre. There are plenty of farms that will be selling their organic milk at $1.50, $1.70, quite a lot more. What we're trying to do is produce something it's a good product, something people really like at a reasonable price that isn't that dissimilar from a supermarket, but we're cutting out all the bit in the middle. I think a vending machine is good because it's actually essentially it's a pretty simple piece of kit. It's just a fridge with a few little gizmos on it. They don't need much input at all. And I know one of the things with retailing and setting up a shop is, you know, you've got all these overheads, and, you know, if there's nobody in the shop, those overheads are still got to be paid. Whereas, you know, vending machines, which have become pretty sophisticated now, could be and are being used more and more to sell quite a wide range of products. Yeah, so this is silage from a mixture of grass and clover lays, as well as deep rooting herbal lays, which are pretty diverse. So the deep rooting herbal lays contain things like chicory, medic, samfoin, plantain, all those sorts of things. And that diversity does, I think, give you a better spread of trace elements in both grazing and obviously silage. But also they're pretty resistant to hot spells. You know, the deep rooting helps in droughts and that sort of thing. Okay, so this is one of the fattening sheds. So we've got fat cattle in here, all around 2 years of age. Most of the cattle in here are fit. And they've been fed on grass only, so silage or grazing. So no concentrates again. Very easy to do with native breeds in the UK, but obviously you're not going to fatten them quite as quickly. So spring calving, but everything away really by the end of the second winter. A couple of interesting things we've learned is sort of weaning. We use creep gates now and wean quite late, and that actually keeps the weight off the cows a little bit, but also I think the calves do much better. Instead of weaning on housing, we have a little gate they can pop through, start feeding the calves silage from the moment they come in maybe late November, early December. Cows are on sort of pretty sparse rations, hay and feed straw, but it keeps the cows moving, and then when the cows are getting close to calving, we just stick a bar across and no mooing, no stress, nothing. And I think of what I've done in the past, which is probably not very good. And that keeps them moving forward. Second summer out at grass, and then finishing the winter off this grass clover herbal lay mix of silage, which they seem to do very well on. You can get a good kilogram a day once they've sort of settled into the winter. The breeds that we got here are Sussex and Hereford, but I'd say one of the things that we found when we came here, we had a type of Hereford that was not really fit for purpose. The traditional Hereford is much more the sort of animal we want, and the Sussex, again, really good breed in terms of converting forage into meat. All the yards on the farm are deep litter housed. I mean, we're lucky in that we grow a lot of straw because our heritage varieties produce tall straw, so we have plenty of bedding, and we use that to create farmyard manure that we then compost and apply back to the land. And it's a sort of key part of management, and probably something we can improve on, but composting manure is, aerating it, keeping it in a really sort of vigorous state, so that actually relatively small amounts applied to the land will really benefit the sward. So an early lesson for me was how something like 3 tons an acre, which is a very small amount of composted farmyard manure, will really benefit clovers, and they seem to respond very vigorously to just light dressings. Feeding lots of grain to livestock is really not the way forward. We've got to think about growing grain for human consumption generally, and less meat but of excellent quality as the way we should be eating our beef and lamb. I think that livestock in our rotation is very definitely necessary, and grazing ruminants, whether they be milk producing, beef producing or sheep. Okay, well the sequence of events in this field would be that the herbal lay has been down for 3 years. You can leave them for a lot longer if you want, but that's enough time to build the fertility in the soil and build the organic matter, but certainly to build the nitrogen, that all important nitrogen. We then plough that lay out, and the plough is a cultivation that receives a lot of negativity at the moment, but we do have to kill that lay in order to grow the arable crop. There are people that are experimenting with direct drilling, but in an organic situation and without glyphosate, the results are definitely mixed. We plough shallow, so 6 to 7 inches. We've measured the fuel that we use, and it's not that much in the grand scheme of things. We also then roll that ploughing to create a relatively firm sort of seed bed, and to make sure that we get a good breakdown of the turf, and then we sow the crop in on top with a combination drill, and we do roll post drilling because we have a lot of stones here, but also again it's firming it all down. We like a nice firm seed bed. We try and do that in relatively early. I mean, one of the things I think that I've probably changed my mind on over the years is rather than going late with these crops, because it gives you sufficient break between cereals, etc. I would say I go early and get good ground cover, and it is one of the times when in an organic system you're most vulnerable to nitrate leaching. So if you've got a good cover on the top, that's a good thing. So seed rates, it's the old hundredweight and a half, really. I mean, what are those, 75 kilos an acre? You can work it out in hectares. I do like acres. And we'll harvest this in, I guess it's be early August, something like that. And then we'll go straight into a catch crop. So we don't leave the ground bare. So that will be something, either stubble turnips, so we can get the sheep in here, or a mixture of stubble turnips, forage rape, and mustard, both of which grow pretty well in a lower fertility situation. But the key thing is the ground is well covered. The mustard will often flower and becomes full of sort of pollen beetles and can be covered in clouds of swallows before they head south, which I always think is a good thing. Graze through the winter, and then for the next arable crop we'll probably plough or cultivate, depending on what we've got on the surface in terms of trash, and then go in with the spring crop, which will be the second crop, and then it would probably go back into a lay again. So generally speaking, trying not to do more than 2 arable crops at a time. This heritage wheat grown in here is a unique mix. So it's been put together by someone called John Letts, he's an archaeobotanist. He's been tied up with the preservation of old cereal genetics for many decades, thank goodness, because someone needs to make sure they don't die out. So this contains over 100 different varieties that have been grown together for many years, and it's what's loosely known as a land race. So it's genetically diverse, lots of different varieties, and it means that it has the ability to adapt to wherever it's grown. So if you start growing this mixture on another farm in another locality, it will start to change, I think, to adapt to that land, the geology and the geography of that landscape. In terms of weeds, you've got much lower levels of nitrogen, and a lot of the weeds that we associate with modern arable farming love high nitrogen. So that's one of the reasons that you tend to get less problems with weeds. The other thing is you've got a tall straw variety, and that will outcompete the weeds. You're also coming out of a lay of grass and clover and mixed herbal lays and that sort of thing. That in itself provides a break. So things like the common arable weeds of today, like blackgrass and cleavers and these sorts of things, they're never an issue. In terms of disease, it's well understood that actually not having high nitrogen doesn't weaken the cell wall of the plant and doesn't give that sort of shock that you tend to get on an intensive system that you then have to address by applying a fungicide. So in a conventional system, you've got to apply all the bells and whistles, which costs a lot of money, as opposed to this, which is obviously lower yielding but lower input and requires no cost. So you're less risk. In terms of yield, the range will be sort of 1.5 tons to 2 tons an acre, something like that. A modern variety here would probably do twice that. Lower yield is inevitable if you're not putting the inputs on, that's a fact. But I guess one of the points I make, looking a little bit wider, is that over half the grain that we grow in the UK is fed back to livestock, and so which is sort of meat and milk production. So if we look at consuming less of those products and producing grain only for human consumption, or mainly for human consumption, we could actually address some of that balance. But also we could produce that food without having to have the high level of chemical inputs that are A, expensive, and B, harming the environment in ways both known and unknown. One of the advantages for us as mixed farms, as a lot of Cornish farmers will be, you've got livestock as well as your cereals, is the colossal amount of straw that you get from these crops has a really high value. So in fact, the most straw I've ever baled has been from some of these crops. And we had a rye crop a couple of years ago where we got 13 5-foot round bales to the acre. So a huge amount of straw. And obviously that's got a lot of value in terms of the farmyard manure that it creates, that you can then compost and reapply to that land. So it's not actually leaving the system, it's not leaving the farm. I mean, I think wholesale change is needed, really. And actually to think that we can go on applying these sort of inputs which we know are ending up in the environment, that we know are creating havoc with the planet's natural systems. I mean, we see it over and over again, and yet we still try and sort of justify their use. And I guess in the short term, we don't have any choice, because that's what we do to produce our food. But the regenerative farming of, if you like, the last 5 years or so is very much variations on a theme. It's certainly a good thing in terms of it's creating a change in farmers' thought processes, and everybody realises we've got to look after the soils better. But essentially, we're still relying heavily on one chemical, and that's glyphosate, and that's Roundup. And the more of the scientific papers you read on glyphosate, the more you realise that we cannot go on using it. It's the world's most widely used chemical. It's found in everything. It's found in seawater, it's found in rain, it's found in throughout this planet, and it's actually having a pretty devastating effect on all forms of life. I mean, we managed before glyphosate to grow perfectly good crops. So we don't actually need it. It's a jolly useful chemical, and I can really understand why farmers want to use it. I mean, I've used it myself in the past, but I've never lost a crop. I've grown organic crops now for 37, 38 years, and I really clearly remember thinking the first crop of organic wheat I ever grew, that how's this going to stay healthy? How's this going to grow? How am I going to keep the weeds out? I can really remember, seeing that, and or thinking that, and I've still got my old textbooks, which are things like Growing Cereals, which was a Bayer publication that we got free at college, funnily enough, that's what I've been brought up on, and yet it quickly became clear to me that you can grow perfectly good crops without all the disease and weed problems that you imagine you're going to get. In terms of, if you like, a leaky system as far as nitrogen goes, when you plough land, it is when you're likely to get most losses. It's when the textbooks would tell you you will get the most losses, particularly in a sort of a warm, wet autumn. My gut feeling is that you don't lose anything like as much as you think you do. It might be a small amount, I guess, is inevitable. But if you've got a really healthy soil, I think it really hangs on to that nitrogen, it hangs on to all the nutrients, because biologically it's absolutely fizzing. Carbon is, should be about carbon cycling. I mean, we want to build carbon in the soil. We know it's a good thing. We know that taking atmospheric, CO2 out and locking it up in the soil is a really good thing to do. I think keeping a healthy soil is what we have to aim at. We've got to be looking at healthy soil biomes. We've got to be looking at healthy gut biomes. They're all variations on the theme. We know that one of the quickest ways that we can start to reduce atmospheric CO2 is to take tired arable land, where the organic matter sometimes as low as 1% or 2%, and get that back into some sort of ley, and ideally I would say a deep rooting herbal ley. You can start to make those changes really quickly. Planting trees does the same thing, but it's much, much slower. Planting trees is a great thing, but we've got to act really fast. And it should become almost law that arable farmers of the UK should put a proportion of their farm into a ley to tie up that carbon. But at the moment it's not profitable for them to do it. But actually, in terms of soil health and, if you like, the longer term benefits, the hidden costs, it will be hugely beneficial. But in terms of climate change and mitigating this huge issue of high atmospheric CO2, getting leys in is really, really important. For anyone who's thinking about doing any of these changes, I would say one thing you can do if you're a livestock farmer is when you next reseed a field, plant a mixed herbal ley, don't put any fertiliser on it, and just carry on using it as you would the rest of your grassland, and you will be amazed at the sort of production you get from that. And the other thing is, if you wanted to take it a step further, there's no harm in, when that ley has done 2, 3, 4 years and you've built the fertility in there, try planting a crop in there and not putting anything on it and see how it does. And I think you'd be very surprised. And I think a lot of this thing is about confidence. This is one of the things that I've got pretty attached to over the years. Bought it new, when did I buy it? 89, I think it was, 1989, 7/8/10, still working regularly. It did have one engine rebuild after about 10 or 11,000 hours. I think we're up to about 14,000 hours now. But One of the things I do have a bit of a bee in my bonnet about is the whole addiction we have to shiny new machines. We all like one now and again. And I think actually keeping your machinery up and together and trying to keep it for longer and repairing it is probably another strand of sustainability that we don't really look at very much, but it's certainly one that I think about. If I was going to give my younger self some advice, I would say keep as much of the value of what you're producing on the farm. It might involve a bit more processing, but just hanging on to it, just not selling a commodity. I would say follow the green money, because that is the direction of travel that is being incentivized now, and whether we like it or not, it's the route we have to follow, because we know our planet is in a bit of a state, and the more evidence you can gather of the things that you've done on the farm, the better, because it all helps back your case if you want to follow this money. And the last thing I would say is back yourself, because as farmers, we're doing the most important thing for civilization. We're providing food, and it's very easy to feel sort of downtrodden by all the negativity that comes our way, but ultimately farmers are the foundation of civilization. So back yourself and be positive.